Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I am Megan Raymond, the Senior Director of Membership and Programs here at WCET. It's great to see you. Those of us that were on the call earlier, we're talking about the weather, and it seems to be an average of 60, no matter where you're at in the States. But we'd love to hear how things are at. If you're unburying from snow still from the cold snap, we'd love to hear how you're doing. As we go through today, you can access the slides. Kim will share a link to the slide deck. If you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A box. If you put them in chat, there's a chance we will lose them. And we want to make sure that we get to your questions. So put those in the Q&A. And then we will follow up with a link to the recording, share the slides, and any resources that are shared. Those will be sent out in the next couple of days. I'd like to share our accessibility commitment. If you have any issues, just reach out and we're happy to help you. So today's webinar is Practical Strategies for Driving AI Policy Adoption in Higher Education. This webinar is hosted in partnership with our friends at HonorLock. And speaking of friends, we have a wonderful moderator today, Dr. Michelle Singh, who's the Vice President for Strategic Educational Alliances at the University of North Texas. Please welcome Michelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are delighted to have so many of you from across the nation, from across different industries, joining us today to talk about such an important concept and such important highlights and suggestions and advice that will help us navigate the times that we are in at all of our different institutions, at all of our organizations. As Megan mentioned, I'm Michelle Singh, and I proudly serve as the VP for Strategic Educational Alliances at UNT, have been in Texas for quite some time, formerly with the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, where I served as their founding Assistant Commissioner for the Division of Digital Learning. It is wonderful today to be joined by two amazing colleagues who have so much expertise, so many pieces of advice to share as we navigate one of the most difficult times and yet one of the most fruitful times for possibilities of opportunities in the history of higher education. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce a person that needs no introduction in the world of WCET, our Executive Director, Dr. Van Davis, who will introduce himself and our fellow panelists.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you are. We're really thrilled that you might be able to join us today for what we think is a really important topic, and also what I think is going to be a lively conversation about how we can begin to do a better job of formulating institutional-wide AI-level policies. As Michelle said, my name is Van Davis. I serve as the Executive Director of WCET. I've been serving as the Executive Director for just a little over a year. And am thrilled to be in this role, working with all of these wonderful folks, both in terms of our members and in terms of our wonderful sponsors. And if you're not familiar with the work that we've been doing here at WCET, since 2023, we've been doing quite a bit of work around institutional level AI policy, practices, and guidelines. And you'll hear more about that work later on today. And I'll turn it over to Paul to introduce himself.
Thanks, Van. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Morales. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at HonorLock. I've been with the organization a little bit under 3 years now. Prior to that, I've worked in roles in the aviation and defense space, healthcare, and edtech. And it's funny enough, edtech just keeps bringing me back. And I'm really excited to speak with everybody today and talk about this really important topic because this is something that's really near and dear to our hearts here. So thanks for having me. And with that, I'll kick it back to Michelle.
Thank you so much. And I think, colleagues, right now, we're at a time in history where there are so many things happening all at once that we almost feel that we are living in this state of being overwhelmed with both concern about what could possibly go wrong and almost this excitement about what could go right. And a lot of these different conversations really stem from historical practice, from the work that we're seeing change. I don't think I've ever been associated with an institution that has people knocking at our door asking for more policies and more guidelines and frameworks to do our jobs. But I will tell you that, frankly, the time that we are in today, people are craving some framework, some guidance to help navigate what is happening. And so right now we have an opportunity to look and stay on the foundation of work that we have historically had. As we like to say in Texas, this is not our first rodeo. This is not our first technology disruption in higher education, nor will it be our last. And so we're really trying to lean into what we've lived to inform where we are going. And a lot of that comes in formalizing our policies for operation and really having a community approach to inform the way that we solidify some of the application that we've had to different enterprise applications, to different innovations that we've survived in the process of growing in higher education. And today's conversation does just that. And to help frame the conversation and really talk about the topics we're going to lean into, I'm going to pass it right back over to Paul to get us started.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, as we all know, AI is a very complex topic. A lot of it has to do with the technology that's involved and how quickly it's evolving. But a part that's not oftentimes considered is the complications that come with governance and accreditation bodies. And that's one of the things that we're noticing, I would say towards the end of last year and then kicking into this year, really going into high gear. We're starting to see accreditation bodies starting to lean into discrete accreditation policies and not just accepting what folks are saying at face value. We're planning to share a few links here for some examples, but there's examples like the Middle States Commission on Higher Ed, who in July of 25 published their criteria, their policies and procedures around their accreditation and how it's dealing with AI. We also saw the same thing even earlier than that in December of 24. The Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, they published their guidelines. So we only expect this to further get implemented going into 26. And I think it's something that we really need to be paying attention to, in addition to that technical evolution that Michelle mentioned. So not to add more to the challenge, but it's something that I think we should be cognizant of and pay attention to. And then also you'll see in the thread of this conversation, stay involved in. One of the other things that I think is really important that we make a, a call out to is just understanding the different types of AI technologies and how they may affect our institutions. So I would say one of the biggest differentiations that we should understand is what is the difference between a generative AI chatbot, like what we see on a daily basis, like your Chat GPTs, your Geminis, your Claudes, those types of things. And then what's this agentic AI that you hear everybody talking about? What makes these things different? So as most of us are familiar with, those AI chatbots are the AI tools that we interact with on a daily basis. That's almost like the chat engine 2.0, 3.0, et cetera, right? We are asking questions, we're having conversations with these chatbots, and they're providing us responses. Agentic AI kind of takes that and takes it to a whole nother level. The difference between these two types is essentially those agentic AIs are goal driven. So they're understanding what is the objective that I'm actually trying to do. I'm not just answering a question. And then it can actually achieve those things independently. It will break down tasks into their subtasks. So take these complex problems and break them down and move and iterate based on what your plan or your layout is. It also can integrate way deeper into tech stacks. So it can utilize APIs, software, other systems, and credentials. And then most importantly, I think, is it can learn and adapt. Most chatbots have memories and those types of things, but these agentic systems can learn and adapt over days, weeks, months, years. And then it has the autonomy to go ahead and try to solve these complex problems utilizing all this. So as I'm sure you can start to think, well, that sounds amazing and that sounds terrifying at the same time, right? Which is something we all have to think about. But I think it's really important to understand this because I think that we'll transition from more of interacting with these models to really starting to oversee specialized teams of these AI agents, especially in the workforce. I would say finally on that, I think it's really important to have this understanding because I think that AI literacy is going to really be moving towards not only just being able to interact with these large language models, but more so of how can you manage agents? And that's going to become a critical career differentiator for folks. Deeper, which will further, accentuate this digital divide that we talk about. So it's something really important that we think about.
And if I could get you to move to the next slide, please. So some of you may be familiar with the fact that a couple of years ago at WCET, we developed, with the help of Dr. Judith Sebesta, an AI policies framework. And we did a massive revision of that framework last year. And what we did with that framework initially and what we built on last year was we basically suggest that institutions need to develop as their foundation ethical and responsible use guidelines. And then there are 3 domains of policies that institutions need to address. They need to address governance policies, they need to address operations policies, and they need to address pedagogical policies. And one of the things that we heard after we released that framework in the fall of 2023 was, this is fantastic, but it's also a little overwhelming. How can we figure out what the sequence is for developing policies and guidelines and practices? And so in the revision that we released back in October, what we suggest to institutions is that there's, just like there's 3 domains, there's 3 levels of policy maturity. That there are priority 1 policies. Those are the foundational imperatives. That's what you need to implement right now. That's things like data privacy and security. It's things like academic integrity. And then there are priority 2 policies. They're strategic enablers. You implement those 12 to 24 months out. And that's really how you begin to think about, how do you drive operational efficiency? How do you systematically improve the quality of teaching, learning, and student support, rather than it just being in bits and pieces, siloed across an institution? So it's really beginning to move towards the strategy. And then there's priority 3 policies. That's what you can begin to think about sort of 2 years out. And that really is, how do you use policies and frameworks and AI to create transformative opportunities for your institutions. These aren't hard and fast. Sometimes you will toggle in between them, but it at least gives you a little bit of an idea of what the sequencing of this work is. What we're really going to do today is focus on priority 2 and priority 3 pieces of the roadmap. We know from a recent survey that we did last spring, and then a study that we released last year based on those survey results, that there is quite a bit more maturity in the field than there was in 2023. That should come as no surprise to any of us. But that a lot of institutions do have or are addressing those foundational issues. And the place where institutions are in that maturity cycle roadmap is really in the priority 2 or the priority 3, and many of them are in priority 2. And so that's what we're really focusing on today is, don't ignore those foundational principles, don't ignore those foundational policies and guidelines and practices. But if you are a little bit more mature, what are the things that you need to look at next? And that's really where we're going to focus our energy today. I said that we said that at the foundation of the work that we do, if you want to move to the next slide, Megan, at the foundation of the work that we believe that everyone needs to be involved in doing is the creation of ethical and responsible use guidelines. There are a lot of frameworks out there to help you think about ethical and responsible use. One of the frameworks that we particularly like is one that Canada put forward called the FASTER framework. And it's a wonderful mnemonic device, basically saying your AI policies and your AI implementation should be fair. You need to be accountable for what you do with the technology. It needs to be secure with a focus on user privacy. It needs to be transparent. folks have a responsibility, folks have a right, and we have a responsibility to make sure that folks understand, particularly our students understand, when AI is being used in a way that may impact their educational journey. AI use should be educated, and then it should be relevant. At WCET, we don't believe in the use of a technology tool just for the sake of using a technology tool. There is no technology out there that is a silver bullet for starters. But most importantly, technology really needs to be in service with our primary core mission in higher education, and that is access and success for all of our learners. And so AI is no different. Yes, it may be the nice, shiny new penny. Right now, it's the shiny new tool in the toolbox that everybody's talking about. But it does us no good to implement AI if it's not relevant to our core mission. So think about FASTER: fair, accountable, secure, transparent, educated, and relevant. And once you have that ethical and responsible use guidelines in place, really then we can begin to talk about the strategies to drive AI adoption. If you want to move to the next slide, Megan.
And while we're talking about this idea of strategies to drive innovation, it's so, you said something, Van, that just really stuck out. 2023 was really when we started seeing AI has been around for a long time, but the rise of Gen AI and this public knowledge and utility has only been around for a couple of years. And just to digest that fact is probably really important for all of us to take a deep breath and think we are all learning as we go. And it has not been that long. So we are comfortable in solidarity here, thinking through that this is an important conversation that is recent to higher education. I'm going to want to say a little bit of a story right now. And I know this never happens at any of your institutions, and nor does it happen any of that I was at, but we've heard of these institutions where there was a committee with faculty that were looking at artificial intelligence, and there was a council of students that were looking at how do you approach artificial intelligence. Then there was a central IT committee that was talking about artificial intelligence, but then there was also the administrative leadership group that was discussing artificial intelligence, as well as different colleges and different divisions that were each having their own conversations about artificial intelligence. And there is a lot of passion, if you will, behind the topic. And people have this energy right now and this enthusiasm that some people really want to run, and others are saying, let's hold back. And I see people laughing because you may have heard of these institutions. What happens in so many of these different conversations is that we stop talking to each other. And the time that we're in right now to really deal with emerging innovation and be able to take a business approach to the way that we adopt emerging innovations on our campuses, it takes more than siloed conversation. It takes a holistic perspective. And now more than ever, it is important to cultivate these cross-functional teams that will bring insight from so many different walks across the ecosystem to build a robust structure and really set ourselves up for success in the future. And to dive a little bit more into that and talk a little more strategy on that, I'm going to hand it right back over to Van.
Thanks, Michelle. Megan, if you want to advance to the next slide. So one of the things that we really emphasize at WCET is the necessity of a cross-functional team approach to institution-wide AI policy and guidelines and practices. And this is one of those cases where the table can't be too big. As Michelle said, we have a tendency in higher ed to have very siloed conversations. I started my career as a professor and an academic administrator. I can't begin to count how many times I was a part of a conversation only to discover that there were 5 other units on the campus that were having an identical conversation. And we weren't talking to each other. We were working at cross purposes. So what you see on this slide are just some of the stakeholder groups that we think are really necessary to be a part of any sort of institutional deliberate conversations about what institutional level AI policies, practices, and guidelines look at, And I want to draw your attention to the very first circle on this slide, and that is students. I also can't think of all of the times at which I was part of a policy conversation where the impact was students. They were the ones that were going to be dealing with the impact of those policies, and we didn't bother to ask how it might impact them. We didn't bother to ask them what they thought. And the reality is, and we all know this, many of our students are much more sophisticated users of AI than we are. And it really behooves us to invite them to the table, to have those conversations with faculty, with instructional designers, with your LMS administrator, with the IT department, with academic and student affairs, with your legal department, procurement, the C-suite, and also really, really critically, particularly with the Title II, Department of Justice, Americans with Disability Act guidelines that go into effect for many of us in April, academic and accessibility support services. So this is really one of these times where I know sometimes having a lot of folks at the table, it can begin to feel like we are creating too big of a tent to get something done. But all of those perspectives are going to help us be much stronger. And I see, Robert, you've mentioned business, and we're actually going to talk about business, our business partners here in a moment, because we obviously have to have them at the table as well. And Paul, I know you have some thoughts about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that collaborative approach and having different perspectives at the table in pretty much most decision making that you come across is going to be applicable. But I think especially for figuring out what your AI policies may be, how you're approaching moving AI forward within the institution. Um, you know, I selfishly like to call out the fact that folks in your IT, security, your privacy departments, your legal. My biggest suggestion would be to try to include them a little earlier in the process if possible, because I'm sure we've all been faced where somebody like me slows down an initiative right at the end, right when we're about to get it across the line because it didn't, we didn't do a risk assessment or it didn't pass muster for legal or something to that effect. And that breeds frustration on multiple sides. And the same way that there's a lot of promise with these types of technologies with individual departments is the same way we view it from a security and IT position. So I would say include those partners early on, and I think you would find you have a lot better chance of getting much more cooperation and working together and moving forward these initiatives, and a lot more flexibility. Which Van, I know in the next slide you're going to touch on that a little bit more.
Yeah, if you want to move to the next slide, Megan. One of the things that we also believe is really critical is that this has to be an iterative process. Again, I think in higher education, we oftentimes have a tendency to do set and forget policies. I am so sorry, but my cat just decided to visit us. One of the things that we sometimes do, and I remember that this happened to me very early in my career, I was handed a project to develop to revise the faculty handbook at one of the institutions that I was at. And I dug into it and discovered that faculty handbook had not been revised in a decade. They had just created it, set it on a shelf, went on with what we were doing. And we can't afford to do that with AI. So really, we have to get into a cadence of constantly revisiting and refining our AI policies, making sure that they are calibrated with the reality of the technology, because we know that that technology is changing so rapidly right now. And that finally, we have to think about this not as we're fixing something, not as something that we're done with, but really what we're doing is we're constantly beginning to optimize our policies and our practices and our guidelines. The other thing, if you want to go to the next slide, we sort of teased this earlier on, but the other really critical component to this entire process is obviously our industry partners. And it's asking ourselves, in working with those industry partners, to really begin to do a couple of things. What are the AI platforms? What are the tools that they expect employees to be able to leverage? And then what are those skills that are uniquely human? Because AI can do a lot of wonderful things, but it's never going to replace the human. These machines can't replicate us. There is something that we have the ability to do in terms of critical thinking, in terms of creativity, in terms of discernment, that AI can't do. We're not at artificial general intelligence, and I'm not convinced that even when we do get there, that AI is going to be able to replace us. I said I started my career as a professor and an academic administrator. My training is as a historian. I'm a humanities guy at heart. I think that actually we're entering a process and a time where the humanities is going to be increasingly important because of those skills that we learn in the liberal arts and the sciences: critical thinking, questioning, reasoning. All of those things are really critical now to make sure that our students are prepared to go into this field and are prepared to partner with their employers of the future. If you could move to the next slide, Megan. So really what we're looking at here is thinking about, where is the human in the loop? What are the tools? What are the expectations? Where is the human in the loop going to be? And I'm going to let Paul talk a little bit more about skills while I let the cat out of my office so that she doesn't take any more screen time up. So if you'll excuse me for a moment while I go off camera.
Yeah, no problem, man. And I think cat's a lot more popular than we would think. But so let's talk a little bit about how, Van touched on those critical thinking skills. And I think from the employer side of it, not only with how we're looking at the next groups of employees at HonorLock, but in other partners that I'm seeing within, or other peers that are in the industries, what are they looking for during their recruitment phases? And I think one of the things to focus on is, as I'm sure we see, this technology is iterating on a daily, if not hourly basis, right? We're no longer in the days where you're seeing fast moving technology move over weeks. We're in the days and the hours at this point. So I think it is very tempting to start to try to chase the latest tech. But as Van mentioned, there's some core skills there, including problem solving skills and those critical thinking skills, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into what those are, that really shine through all, rather than focusing on chasing the tech, that we're getting that feedback from our industry partners. Um, I think one of the key skills that we can focus on is, how is there fact checking, right? We're seeing on the HonorLock side, with a lot of partners that we're working with, we're actually seeing a rise in real-time assessment during interviews. And what we're starting to see folks experiment with is utilizing AI in a controlled environment and watching how the candidate would interact with the AI model or some other automation tool, and how that candidate can actually take a problem that you present and frame it in a way with the provided tool to help solve, and see how they iterate through that solution. So instead of being focused on, can you use this large language model, or can you use this agentic tool? Here's a tool that we're providing, and show us how you would help us solve this business problem utilizing this tool. And then I think the other thing to really focus on, which was mentioned earlier, is the fact that focus always on, where's a human in the loop. I think it is going to be something that's if organizations haven't figured it out yet, they will very quickly learn that the most expensive employee is one that trusts AI blindly. And we've all seen it, right? There's folks that unfortunately just use the first output from an AI model, and that is gospel, and they push it out for everybody to have to deal with, right? They didn't want to read it themselves, but everybody else must read it. So I think it's really important that we focus on how do we have those checks and balances? Where in the systems are there human in the loop? And what skills contribute to that? And I think that will really help prep the next generation of folks for that are entering the workforce for what they're going to be coming across. So I guess, Finn, can you tell us a little bit about how you see that transitioning, I guess, on the institution side?
Sure. If you want to go to the next slide, Megan. So the devil's in the details here, isn't it? And the reality is that we are tasked, I think, with trying to figure out how do we integrate AI into our curriculum? How do we make sure that our students are well prepared for the world that they're going to be going into? But how do we also make sure that we're doing a good job of our core mission, which is dual purpose, I think. It is training our students, teaching our students to be good citizens and good employees in this AI world, but also validating their learning. For a long time, we have used narrative and writing as a way of assessing student mastery. And I would suggest in some cases that's very appropriate. And in some cases, perhaps that wasn't the best assessment. I think what we have to grapple with as a profession is that we now live in a world where it is very possible for some of these large language models to quickly create narrative, to quickly create text. It may not always be very good text. It may not always be very good narrative, but they're able to do it with some proficiency. And we no longer, I think, can always use text as way, writing as a way of assessing a student's knowledge, ability, and skills. We're going to have to think about new assessment strategies. That's really challenging. I said I started my career as a professor, as a historian. I wasn't trained how to assess students. I came out of an R1 program. I got a whopping day and a half instruction on how to teach. That was a day more than my colleagues got because I taught in an experimental freshman composition program as a historian. So think about that. They had me teach freshman comp as a historian. I wasn't taught how to assess my students. I assessed them the way that I had been assessed in my small liberal arts college. So really it's how do we teach students to use AI properly? How do we make sure that in some of the ways that I think we can do that is we can begin asking students to look at the process, and we can look at the process as well. We can invite them to use AI under controlled circumstances. We ask them to document how they're using AI, to submit their AI conversation logs, to assess their ability to do things like steer the conversation, to fact check, to refine the machine's output. And really it becomes a transition of teaching AI to teaching with AI. Now, I am not so naive as to believe that that is going to be an easy transition for us to make. We are dealing, Michelle referenced this early on. We are dealing with a lot of burnout right now in the academy. We have dealt with a lot of challenges since 2020, and I'm not sure that we have, and I'm not sure our faculty have really recovered from those challenges of the pandemic, let alone now the challenges that AI is facing, that we're facing with AI. This is going to be a heavy lift, I think, for all of us, but it's going to be a really critical lift if we want to do right by our students, but also if we want to do right by our profession to make sure that we're doing the best job that we possibly can in validating our students' knowledge, ability, and skills. And Paul, I know that you have something that you want to say about the integrity of AI assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you hit on a great point there. Both you and Michelle hit on a great point there as far as how this is going to be a challenging shift, and a lot of us are well in the middle of it right now. We're knee deep in it, so we don't want to discredit from that. And one of the things I like to call out is the fact that while the obstacle may be challenging, it doesn't change the fact that it is an obstacle that we need to navigate. And I think that what you'll come across is there's tons of tools out there in order to help navigate those challenges. And as we're starting to shape how education is changing, how we're assessing our students and those types of things, you may have to utilize tools that allow you to better assess where they're at with your type of delivery. And I think that validation point that you called out, Van, as far as not only validating to the workforce that that graduate has earned this degree and they have the skills required to do the job and continue into their career, that you know you have to continue to keep in mind that the validity of that degree is also in jeopardy if you don't protect it. So I think there's multiple tools out there. I think you just need to focus on maintaining some type of practice versus performance framework, right? So letting students use AI to learn, but you use a secure environment to verify that mastery or to validate it. I think that's really important. And we can move on to the next slide. And I just want to kind of take us back a little bit. In November of 22, if we could kind of rewind a little bit, when ChatGPT was being released to the public, I think everybody had their concerns and their ideas of how it would be utilized, and the effect that it would have on academic integrity. And the interesting thing that we learned, I was actually on a lock at that point. The interesting thing that we learned was that actually wasn't the way that we were seeing. Folks were really concerned, like, they're going to be going to ChatGPT and they're going to be able to answer all their test questions by going to the website. And the way to deal with that is like, how can we block them from getting there? And what we actually learned in very quick order was the fact that the real threat would come in the form of extensions. We saw this happen overnight. Essentially, cheating extensions were being installed in the tens of thousands overnight. And essentially, these extensions sit within a browser. They can scan a web page and just provide an answer pretty quickly. And what's really interesting with these types of tools, which further deepens that digital divide, is it really comes down to the people that have either been recommended the tool or they can swipe their credit card to buy a subscription to it. They don't have to have a deep understanding of how AI works. So I think that was one of the big kind of eye-opening events for us early on with this. And it's been a really core focus of what we've been doing at HonorLock as far as blocking those extensions. But that's just one facet of it. But I think it's a really important one to call out, as we've seen history didn't necessarily play out exactly as we thought it would have.
And all of these points that we've been talking about really, really put us at a moment where we need to figure out, with everything that is moving, all of these moving parts, how do we go beyond just adoption to leading? How do we cultivate our skill set as the leaders, as the experts in these conversations, as those with the historical context? How do we position ourselves to not be in such a reactive state every single moment, but really start to shift our own mindset in trusting who we are, in trusting what we have done, that will inform how we lead tomorrow. One of the biggest things is we are in a constant state of change. Everything is happening so fast, and Paul and Van have talked about this. This is larger than artificial intelligence. This conversation is not just about AI. This conversation, if you will, is about the other AI, adapting to innovation, being able to create the infrastructure, the policies, the culture to shift a mindset across divisions, across the academy, to understand how we can move deliberately, how we can move in an informed manner and in a safe and responsible manner to ensure that our institutions and our students are prepared to leave our institutions and go into the workforce, having been informed, having practiced, and having confidence in being able to adapt and react to the demands of their work. We and all of this chaos have to be the grounding force. We have to be the ones that can drive human conversations and really lean into human relationships. We have to break the silos that we've seen historically. We have to bring more people to the table. We have to be able to move from policies that take 8 months to a year to be able to get through to more 8 days and adapt and go. We have to be able to look at teaching and how we do things and how we assess and how it can be amplified, not replaced by the different technologies that are being introduced. We have to understand what our own risk tolerance is. We have to gauge where we're comfortable experimenting and where we're empowering people to make mistakes, if you can believe it or not. How we're creating these environments where people can go in and practice skills and research and develop, and then be able to operate from that mentality into actual practice that is impacting our students. There are so many different times where we talk the talk, and we are now, as leaders in this space, we have to give ourselves the ability to walk the walk as well. And it doesn't have to be high stakes. We can start with things like Chat GPT. Tell me what I can make for dinner today with the 5 ingredients in my refrigerator. I have more than 5 ingredients in my refrigerator, but just to get yourself used to the idea of how do we use this in slow progression so that we too can get comfortable in leading these conversations in a safe and responsible environment. We have to try to practice low stakes approach for our students as well, so that they can learn how to use AI to empower themselves as learner. I know we're in a time of fear several times, and we're afraid of the unknown and maybe a little anxious about it. And I encourage and challenge all of us not to lose that fear. Keep the fear, but instead of being away from it or being afraid of it, use it. Use it as an ability to stand and look at things safely and responsibly, and question that gut when you're approaching different technologies to ensure you're safe and you're able to get through it. I will tell you one story that, and we'll jump into Q&A right after that. So please bring on the questions in the Q&A feature. Our students recently served on a panel, and considering that our missions have stayed the same through all of this, we have an obligation to prepare our students to jump into the workforce so that they are ready to prepare themselves to take on whatever challenges they may have there. Our students sat on a panel and very eloquently stated, from undergraduate to doctoral, we had students that said, the moment that I'm in right now, I feel I can't showcase my talent and who I am without fear of being accused that I'm using AI. I am needing to bring the level of my performance down so that my integrity is not questioned. I want us to take a minute and think about what that means for the missions that we have at our institutions and what our primary goal is and will always be. And that is to make sure that our students get the best experience and show the best version of themselves when they leave our institutions. So when we are getting ready to lead conversations, which are really rooted in change management at our institutions, let's think about everything holistically that we've talked about today. And hopefully you leave a little more empowered when you're having these conversations. Remember that you're not in this alone, that you have all of us here. And so what I want to go ahead and do is, we're not just giving you conversations and pieces that you can have, we're also leaving you with resources that you can take and adapt and develop at your own institutions. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Paul to talk a little bit about what some of those tools are.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Michelle. And I think that's a great way to sum this up. Is after hearing all of this, I know there's a lot to digest there, but staying involved and Michelle, you made a comment about that fear, not losing the fear. I think that's very important, and transition into the perspective of just looking at it as risk and being realistic with that risk and acknowledging it and seeing how you're going to deal with it. And here's a couple resources. Some of them you've seen already today, but just in case you need to grab the links from the ecosystem framework here on the left to help architect your policy. And then on the right-hand side, there's also a plug and play AI statement to align that institution policy for you to help you with that. But use these things as a conversation starter if you haven't kicked that off. and most importantly, kick those conversation nuts off or make sure that you become a part of those conversations. Be involved. That is the most important takeaway that you have today. And I think with that, we can go ahead and kick into questions.
And again, feel free to keep putting those in the Q&A feature. And so I'm going to open up with one, and this is for both of you because I'm sure we've encountered abstainers. There's such a dichotomy in approach when we come to AI, right? We see these two different polarities of I'm all in, I'm moving, I am completely AI, I'm part robot. And then you have the others of I'm going back to a chalkboard, I don't want anything to do with this. And then you have the sweet spot all around the center. And so there are all different types of AI aptitudes or all different types of AI appetites in this conversation. So our question from Brenda is, I'm very interested in opening a dialogue with the AI abstainers at my institution. Do you have strategies, practical approaches, or suggestions to invite them to the table to have a constructive conversation? And so, Van, I'll start with you, and then Paul, if you want to add on to that.
Sure. I think one of the most important things to remember, and it's a really good starting point, is that we want the same things. Whether you are an AI abstainer or you're not an AI abstainer, you want the same things, which is you want to make sure that you're able to assist your students in learning, in navigating the world as a citizen, in navigating the world as an emerging professional. Full stop. It doesn't matter whether we think AI is great or whether we are frightened of AI. That's what we want. I think that you start the conversation with common ground. I think the other thing that you do is you start the conversation with a sense of inquiry. And it's very simple. Ask them, what are your concerns? And listen. And we don't do that very well sometimes. And maybe I'm speaking to the choir in terms of talking to myself now. I was raised as a debater. I was raised to listen to what somebody else said, not in a sense of inquiry, but to figure out how to poke holes at their argument. That was great when I was doing interscholastic debate. Really, really not a good skill as a working professional. So I think that we start from the common ground. What is going to be best for our students? We ask, what are your concerns? Not in an attempt to try to say you're wrong, but in an attempt to really understand what the concerns are, because my guess is they're probably pretty legitimate. And then it's a question of how do we begin to address those concerns? Is there a way that we can cooperatively find solutions that are not dismissive of those concerns, but address them in a way that is appropriate for that discipline, for that level, for that course, for that student? So I really do think, and we invite our skeptics to the table. We cannot afford for folks to think that this is something that is being done to them. It's something that we have to invite them to the table. You know, we showed that graphic on that slide very early on of all of the stakeholders. Well, one of the stakeholder groups that wasn't on there is the skeptics. And they need to be at the table as well, because there are some very legitimate reasons to be concerned about these technologies and to be a little afraid of these technologies too. And I don't want to blow smoke up anyone and make you think that everything is fine, because it's not.
Really good points there, Ryan. I think that it reminds me of, all of us kind of have some really memorable things from university. I think one for me was I was in a systems analysis and design class, and one of the things that was called out was when you're designing a system or implementing a new initiative, one of the core things you want to do is focus on including your detractors early on. Because if you wait until you're delivering a solution and that's the first time a detractor versus a champion may see it, that can derail your whole initiative. And I know that wasn't the question, but I think it's important to call that piece out. So how do I get that person who may not necessarily be a detractor, but this may be a concerned bystander, somebody says, I'm not going to get involved. I think a lot of us can acknowledge the fact that a lot of times fear is driven by ignorance of things. So I think it's important to first of all realize and remind ourselves, and Michelle mentioned it earlier, remind ourselves of the fact that AI being available to the masses is a fairly new concept. AI as a technology itself is not new. It's been around for years. The difference was that it was really relegated to a handful of tech giants. What happened with ChatGPT and why it was so revolutionary was the fact that it democratized AI and allowed folks to have access. So, what I would tell that person that's sitting on the sidelines is, I completely understand how you feel. And oftentimes I feel the same way, but let us not feel defeated. Be a part of this process. We will never have this opportunity with this type of technology or this type of obstacle to not be involved. And I think if you look at history, no matter what the issue has been, folks most times regret, they very rarely regret being involved. They often regret not being involved. So that's the piece that I would say is just encourage them to be involved because we are very early stage. Nobody has it figured out. There's no better time to be involved.
I love these comments, and just to add to it, I think one of the things that we're all saying is acknowledge the vulnerability that exists in the current state that we're in now. Several of us have expertise in an academic discipline or a specialization. We may not have the knowledge or even just the base knowledge of understanding of what AI actually is, what it can do, and what it is capable of. And acknowledging that in a common space is powerful. We don't know. We say the words, but we don't know what is behind them or what they mean and how they'll impact us. The other thing is lean into your experience. This isn't the first time that we introduce a new technology or a new innovation to campuses. There are those individuals that will never use the high-tech rooms that we have now created with all of the bells and whistles in a physical setting. How do you approach those conversations, or how did you approach those conversations? When you were introducing a new enterprise-wide technology, how did you take everyone to the table through that journey? It is important for us to remember that and learn from that so that we can inform the direction to bring others to the table. Remember, the word or, which means more than one opinion or either or, is in the word transform. It takes all opinions to be able to set that grounding framework to move forward to where we're going. And right now, there is an active discussion in the chat, really looking at different questions. And Nick actually had one of, how do you change your course content items to embrace Gen AI usage by the students as opposed to using it as evidence to accuse and harshly grade submissions due to AI use? And this has a lot of layers in it, but this is more along the line of, and we can take this from multiple directions. How do you adjust your content? And there are several different suggestions on how do you slowly invite to projects, to different things. But I'd love to hear maybe some of the examples that you've heard from colleagues across the nation on how they're modifying their pedagogical approaches currently today. So Paul, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, and I would say with modifying that course content or how you're approaching that problem, I think I think it really depends on the institution. I think that, obviously for me, I started my career in higher ed, so the approaches have definitely evolved since then. I can tell you what we're seeing with certain customers, and we're seeing seeing it run the whole gamut, honestly. We're seeing folks that are including it, especially for us, we're focused on the assessment side. We're seeing folks that are actually including it within their assessment, which is honestly something that we didn't expect to see with our platform, because we were primarily focused on how do we create those guardrails to secure an environment from an AI assisted assessment. But now it's leaning into how can we actually integrate AI into the assessment and document that whole process. I would probably defer a little bit more to Van on like how you actually implement that on the day to day, but we're seeing it run the gamut.
I think that there's some some really, to me, intriguing ways of doing this. One of the things that I have seen folks do in, say, some of the more advanced composition courses is they have the students prompt AI to write an essay, and then they ask the student to evaluate that essay, and then provide a reflection on what the AI did right and what did it do wrong. And a lot of times it's what did it do wrong. So it's really sort of flipping the script and asking students to take on higher order thinking projects. Another way that we've seen this is having students use AI as a thought partner, as a creative thought partner and brainstormer, but documenting that process and then doing reflective essays on what that was like and what worked and what didn't work, and how did that leave the student feeling about their own ability to do the work. So I think that, you know, a lot of times, and again, I'll speak to myself, a lot of times, especially early in my career, my assessments were very prescriptive. They were not necessarily very reflective. They didn't really ask students to reflect and engage in, especially in the introductory course, in some of that higher order thinking. And so I think that one of the things that we can do with the assessment process now is ask students to be more reflective about what they're learning, why they're learning it, why it's important, and how are they going to use it. And then I'll give one quick shout out to the folks over at Oregon State University's eCampus. They have created a really wonderful tool of Bloom's taxonomy adopted for the AI age. And I would strongly recommend that you take a look at it. It's something that they've made freely available. All you have to do is go over to the eCampus page at Oregon State University, type in AI and Bloom's taxonomy, and it'll show up. And it's a really nice one-page description of the ways in which we can think about AI to sort of upend Bloom's taxonomy and the way that we have historically thought about skills, abilities, and knowledge assessment.
And that's 100% in alignment with the chat string that's going in, moving from the final answer to the learning process, you know, flipping the script on things. And so I love this. And it's amazing where the time goes when you're having a good time. We are getting to the end of our thing. So I will ask both Paul and Van to wrap up with just one piece of advice that you have for people that to continue in their AI journeys. And then we'll jump into Megan just giving us a little wrap up. But I do want to say, give yourself grace in this conversation. Give yourself the ability to take it all in without it overly consuming you, and trust yourself. You have the skill set, you have the expertise to really be that change agent and that difference, that voice of reason in the world that we have to navigate. And so, Van, I'll give it to you for one quick wrap it up on what's your piece of advice?
Be curious and don't assume that you know all of the answers. And the more perspectives that we have at the table, the better off we're going to be as higher education, and the better off our students are going to be. And that includes those folks that may be skeptical.
Wonderful. Paul?
100%. Yeah, very much along the same lines. I would make it even more short, is just the fact of stay involved or get involved. Far too many folks are sitting on the sidelines, and even if your point of view is coming from a very critical perspective, be a part of the conversation. Share your views. Be vulnerable. You mentioned that, Michelle, very early on. Don't be afraid of being vulnerable. You get a lot more. Folks tend to be a lot more open with you when you're vulnerable.
Thank you both so much. This was an absolutely wonderful conversation. We have a list of questions. We will try to get to you, follow up with you after, and I'm going to hand it over to Megan.
Great. Thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation. Really appreciated the perspectives in the chat. And thank you, Michelle, for threading all of these pieces together for us. So if you're new to WCET, check us out. We have lots of great information about AI and digital learning. We have a couple events coming up. If you like the AI and human-centered design conversation, we have a closer conversation, and those are exclusively for WCET members. That's on February 20th. Our Policy to Practice Summit is coming up, and that's in partnership with Quality Matters. So if you're a member of WCET or Quality Matters, and you can register to join us on February 26th for that half-day virtual summit. And free and open to everybody is our Beyond Disclosures Proactive Professional Licensure Compliance and Higher Education webcast coming up with Higher Education Licensure Pros on March 4th. And then I, of course, want to acknowledge our sponsors. They help make much of what we do here at WCET possible. We really are grateful for HonorLock and all they do to support the ongoing work in our community. And our WCET supporting members that invest in WCET at a higher level to help us continue to deliver program services and resources that are just in time and necessary for you all. So thank you to our presenters. Thank you to our participants for being actively engaged, and we'll see you on the next WCET webcast. Take care, everybody. Thank you.